These are the best times for us and the worst times. They're the best times because we have the best opportunity to restore not only our humanity. Oh, I don't know what's happening. I was saying, can you hear me now? I was saying this is the best time for us and the worst time. It is the best time for us because we have the greatest opportunity to restore our humanity and give the world a new humanity. It's the worst time for us because we don't seem to know that. We don't seem to know where we are in the world, and we don't seem to have been able to locate ourselves on the map of human geography. We have underrated ourselves, and we have mistakenly accepted the word minority too long until we begin to feel like a minority and to act like a minority. We have been programmed into dependency. Dependency on people who are less efficient than we are, only we don't seem to know it. Let's start up front and work backward. Let's start with the most paramount issue facing African people today. Let's start with South Africa and Namibia. Let's look at Southern Africa. Let's look at not only where we've gone wrong, but where we are still going wrong. We have lost the concept of nation, and we have lost the concept of being responsible for nation. We are begging for crumbs from the table of a thief. We expect too much. We expect too much from Europeans, and we should expect absolutely nothing. The least thing we should expect is for the European to practice Christianity and democracy that he never believed in and never will believe in and never will practice. He came out of Europe lacking the sentiment to practice democracy and Christianity. And up until recently, and there may be places right now, there were parts of the United States where you could get put in jail for practicing Christianity and democracy. There were parts of the British Empire where you could get put in jail for practicing Christianity and democracy. We are religiously a naive people. We are religiously a politically naive people. We think people believe what they say. We think people mean what they say. We are so unracist. We are afraid when people call us racist. We panic. We are so afraid of being called racist. We're afraid to be racial. And there's a distinction between being racist and racial. Every people look after themselves. And we have not studied how other people picked themselves up from the ground of the world and became a people again after defeat. We're not the only people who have ever been defeated. We're not the only people who have ever been slaves. Other people have recovered from it and gone on to be the master of the very people that enslaved them. The rise of modern Japan is a good example. Haven't I told you repeatedly, one of the main reasons why Japan rose, and one of the main reasons why the Japanese could recover from 2 atomic bombs and defeat in war, is they failed to let their enemy take 2 things from them that you are still lacking: self-confidence and a concept of God as you originally conceived him to be. You will not deal with the fact that most of the literature, the television, everything is a program against your concept, program against your confidence, programmed against your concept of the deity. You are the only people who worship a God that don't look like you. I'm not arguing about you worshiping God. I'm not arguing about you leaving the church. I don't want you to leave the church. I want you to stay in the church and make it a great institution. Make it an institution of liberation. It is not less a spiritual institution by being an institution of liberation. That's part of its overall function. Now let's look at what's happening in South Africa. Let's take Namibia. And the countries, before the country came independent, a year before, real estate owners who control vast real estate throughout the world were buying up their offices, buying up land. They already control the economics of the country. Now, if they control the economics of the country, how can the country ever be free? Soon the country is going to have to beg for a loan to pay its bills. Now, to conquer people, they don't send armies anymore. They send loans, and they tie up your economy. Then you got to do what they say do. You got to choose the enemies they choose. You got to choose the friends they choose for you. You got to send out the messages they permit. And this is not independence. Namibia's got no independence. There are no independent states in Africa. Stop kidding yourself. Not one. If you're independent, you can sustain yourself. You are free of foreign banks. You got an educational system that you fashioned for yourself and not one model after taken from a foreigner. You have a God that you worked out for yourself and not one given to you by a missionary who was sent there to control your mind. I have told you repeatedly that as a people we have been under siege for 3,000 years, over 3,000 years, that our enemy has either been at our door, in our house, or in our bed. And we have not dealt with it. We have not dealt with the internal enemy and the external enemy. And to compound the question, we have made enemies out of ourselves. We have not taken on each other. We have not taken on the internal thieves. That's why we have not taken on the external thieves. We have not taken on people who exploit each other. So therefore we can't take on people who exploit us. We lack the energy, and yet we will fight each other quicker than we will fight any of our enemies. Because our enemy is the same color, the same physical makeup of our deity. And one of the main reasons you won't hit a white man, you think you're hitting a creation of God because they're the same complexion as the Christ they gave to you. I'm not arguing about whether you should worship a Christ. I'm just questioning whether you should worship that one. Now, let's go back to Namibia. How free is Namibia? It has gold. It hasn't got 10 trained people who can handle gold. It has diamonds. Diamonds that you can pick off the beach. It hasn't got one diamond cutter. Hasn't got one diamond marketer. Ships come and go. Hasn't got one harbor engineer. They need airport, not one master airport technician. And you think you got a free country? You don't have a free country until you have people responsible, that looks like you, responsible for the maintenance of everything in a country. If you have to depend on other people to sustain the basic necessities of your country, you are not free. You're just another kind of colony. You got a limousine and you got a flag, but the foreigner has to pay your salary because the foreigner stole your money, multiplied and giving you a portion of it. And you think you're free. And you can be lulled to sleep by all this confidence. We have to establish a new form of self-reliance, and we have to go back and listen to some people we ignored. And we have to go back and stop all of this assumption about a fight. We better go back and listen to the self-reliance message of Booker T. Washington. If you live in a brick house, why not own a brick yard? If you wear leather shoes, why not learn how to tan leather and design shoes? All of this goes into the structure of nation building. Du Bois said, why not hold it together politically? It's not a question of whether Du Bois was right or Booker T. Washington was right. They were both right. Only Du Bois was premature. Had you followed Washington, Washington's message would have logically led you to Du Bois, and Du Bois' message would have logically led you to Garvey. And Garvey's message, properly understood, would have logically led you to the understanding of what Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X were talking about. Because all these men were talking about the same thing, the reclamation of nationhood. Self-confidence. How to build. You will read too much about current events on South Africa. Have anybody taken the time to find out how did the whites come to South Africa in the first place? What was the condition of the world when they came to South Africa in the first place? Have we studied the 200-year turning point in the history of the world? 1400 to 1600, when Europe came out of its hungry bag, came out of its ice box to search for warmth, to search for sweets, to search for spices, to search for something to put on that bad European food so they could eat it. When they lost longitude and latitude, didn't even know what to do with a ship if they had one. When they finally got one, they had to learn how to sail again. They had lost all sentimental attachment to themselves and all sentimental attachment to other people. They would now lie, steal, do whatsoever they had to do, take from anyone. They had sold their own children to slave traders. Now, here he comes in knocking at your door instead of courteously inviting him for dinner. Any man who would sell his children to slave trader, he would do twice that to you. Because you didn't study his history. You don't know his temperament. Didn't know it then, don't know it now. Didn't you know your own strength then and didn't know it now? Now, briefly, let's see if we can walk through some of the main events in the history of the world in Southern Africa before apartheid. But first, let's look at Africa before Europe. I know it strains your imagination because your school books, the radio, the television, tell you there was nothing in the world of enlightenment before Europe. Over half of the history of the world was over before anyone knew that there was a European in the world. Over half of human history was over. Didn't know he existed. Africans had already had all kinds of religions, all kinds of structures, all kinds of dynasties, all kinds of gods. One religion would last 300 or 400 years, then he would change to another one. I'm not talking about religion in Africa, I'm talking about spirituality. Because the Africans created no religion, they created spirituality, which is higher than religion. With spirituality, you don't have to be hypocritical. You don't have to argue about denominations. Because spirituality embraces all of it. It doesn't put one against the other. It acknowledges that man have a different ways of worshiping in different places at different times. It acknowledges the human beingness and the godliness of everything that has life. It acknowledges that God is a part of all living things. And if you have to pray, you don't necessarily have to go to a temple or a church. If God is a part of all living things, you can pray to the water, pray to the wind, pray to the tree, but most important thing, God is a part of you. Pray to the God inside of yourself. Once you lost that and began to play around with the toys of foreigners, you were in trouble. We were always fascinated by the toys of foreigners. Okay, let's look at this 1400 to 1600. Europe is coming out of the bag of the Middle Ages. The famines and plagues, they've lost 1/3 of their population. New engineering, new maritime skill, new technology coming out of China, then the leading technical nation of the world, was preserved at the University of Salamanca in Spain, translated by the Africans and the Arabs, collectively called Moors. The Europeans would get this information and turn on those who had preserved it. With longitude and latitude, they would know how to point a ship again. They now, partly on their feet, they would engage in an argument about whether the world was round or flat, but that was not the real issue. They said, round or flat, I want all of it. They still want all of it. You think there's a difference between communism and capitalism so far as world dominance is concerned. So far as you is concerned, one is the flip side of the other. Racism does not stop at the door of communism or socialism. It doesn't stop at the door of Christianity. You think people believe what they say. Never mind what they say. Watch what they do. There's an African folk's tale often told by Chinua Achebe, who's seriously ill in London, incidentally. He was hurt in an automobile accident in Nigeria. Had to fly him to London. That's another disgrace. Nigeria's been training doctors for 50 years. Why did they have to fly him to London? Nigerians don't have enough confidence in their own doctors. Lack of self-confidence. My main point here is that the European began to regain his self-confidence. The so-called Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, when the Europeans had been forced back into Europe after the Romans had disgraced themselves trying to handle Christianity that didn't fit their temperament, and Islam rose and pushed them out of the Mediterranean. These were years of European lack of confidence, so accustomed to enslaving non-European people, but not unaccustomed to enslaving European people. They turned on themselves and created a European system of slavery that lasted 1,000 years, called feudalism. You can kid yourself if you want to, but feudalism was European slavery. And Europeans sold each other on the auction block. And when the woman showed tendency of having power, he declared her a witch and burned her alive. He grew up afraid of authority. He grew up insecure. He was afraid of women then. He's afraid of women now. You created a society where a woman could go as far as her mind could take her without making you feel afraid. Foreigners brought you into another society where you began to adopt the traits of the foreigner. Now, most of you are afraid of women and think they're object of your exploitation, or should be. And you have forgotten that in Africa, you assisted in bringing into being the first female guards, the first woman to ride at the head of an army, the first woman to head a state. When people take you out of your cultural incubator and put you into a cultural incubator alien to your culture, they don't have to build jails for you. You also forgot that you built an enduring society in Africa that not only did not have a jail system, didn't have a word in their language that meant jail. Didn't have a word in that language that meant orphanage, because no one threw away children. Didn't have a word in that language that meant old people's home. No one threw away grandma and grandpa. The family structure was a miniature industry. And when you married into a family, you married into a collective, a family collective. There was no teenage pregnancy. No prostitution. Everybody looked after everybody. We brought some of these traits to the new world, the so-called new world. Some of us practiced them as long as we could. But when we start living in an apartment house where space is so static, as against a house in the country where you got more space, we stopped being kind to each other. We stopped having the big dinners. We stopped having the big get-togethers. We became individuals. We developed some form of selfishness. Okay, now let's go back to Europe. Let's go back to how Europe got out into the world when we let that tiger out of the barrel again. And we're partly responsible for it. Many brothers are Muslims, but I've never met a single black brother who's a Muslim who is a true scholar of their faith, who studied it with skillfulness, how it rolls, and who understands that the Arab is the most corrupt element within Islam. Also an idea thief. Also harbors a fear of women. Also have some mixed up ideas about other people. Took a perfectly good religion and turned it into a murder cult by declaring holy wars on people. Jihad. You don't believe in my religion, I got to kill you. My God said it's all right to put you to the sword. And yet, they say God is love. If God is love, then God didn't curse anybody. Yet the Hebrew faith said that God is a curser. The Arabs say God gave him the right to kill those outside of the faith. The Christian faith said that God gave him the right to enslave and to look over those of lesser breeds. Now you can understand how I can be a highly spiritual person without believing in any of it. And I think I'm higher than religion. I think I'm higher than being a religious person because I'm a giving spiritual human being. I embrace all of it. When we became partisan, started embracing one, putting one against the other, we were in trouble. When we began to listen to the temperament of the European, when we began to pay attention to him, when we began to transfer to him some of the humanity that we had among ourselves, we were in trouble. But this started with a 1,000-year relationship with Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. 1400, he's rising again. The Africans and the Arabs are having a silly argument among themselves in Spain. Africans and the Arabs are marrying more than the customary 4 wives and letting them stay in the Catholic Church, which is disaster. The Africans, being Puritans, decided that he would marry the Spanish woman, but she would have to keep a proper Muslim diet. And if he came from a country where the woman wore the veil, she would have to wear the veil. Failing this, he would send home to Africa to get his wife. This argument weakened both the Arab and the African hold on Spain, and subsequently they began to lose. There was a third party in Spain that we don't talk about because people think that you are anti-something. And something that they said that you are anti, the very word came out of the 17th century. How can you be anti-Semitic when the very word Semitic wasn't even used until the 13th century? And it wasn't Semitic, it was Shemitic. They took the word Shem and mutilated it into the word Semitic. Semitic. See the sound? You can mutilate one into the other. Then if you tell a person of the Hebrew faith your socks don't match, you're anti-Semitic. Then the sun's too hot, you're anti-Semitic. And we accept this because we're so hung up with the Bible because we don't know how to read it. But we actually believe in it, but we don't know how to read it. We can't separate folklore from fable. We don't know an allegorical story told to illustrate the truth. And if you tell an allegorical story to illustrate the truth, the story you told to illustrate the truth need not be the truth, so long as the truth gets across. Okay, now, Europe in this 15th century, we're talking about 1455 now, the Africans and the Arabs are losing Spain. The grandees, the money managers of Spain, the Jews, are watching both sides, so whichever side loses, they can jump the other way. Finally, the Africans and the Arabs are expelled. And soon the Spaniards, who are whitening up, give the Jews 3 weeks to pack and go. If they're whitening up and give the Arabs a short time to go and the Africans a short time to go, why did they expel the Jews if the Jews were white? And if they're whitening up? You're dealing with a different kind of Jew in Spain. You're dealing with the Sephardic Jew, the Mediterranean Jew, who's the majority of the Jews in Israel today who do not enjoy first-class citizenship. They went to Spain. After the expulsion, they went to Antwerp in Holland, where they found the Dutch East India and the Dutch West India Company. They began control of the diamonds, gold. They were in control of the diamonds and the gold coming out of Africa, mainly gold, during the Middle Ages. The Dutch East India Company, the Dutch West India Company helped to establish South Africa. If you're listening well, you can understand there's a logical relationship between Israel and South Africa. They're both artificial settler nations, stealing something that don't belong to them and using mythology to justify their thievery. Now the Africans being expelled from Spain, some would go back into Africa. Some Africans converted to Catholicism and stayed on in Spain and melted into the bloodstream of Spain. That's why in the Mediterranean you see some people moderately handsome with olive complexion. That's us. They used to boast about it. There was a time when the European with a little black blood in him that made him good looking, he would look with admiration at the other one and say, a little touch of the Moor. Now they lie and hide and put some powder over it. There was a time they took pride in it. Having some of that holy stuff that God sent us down straight from the sun through our mother and father. The good stuff. You think it's bad. That was a time it was the glory of the world. And you've forgotten that time. You've forgotten how to tell your children, if indeed you ever knew about it. All right, now, why was South Africa established? They needed a filling station for the European ships going to India and China. So established it at the Cape of Good Hope. These Boers were political malcontents when they got there. They belonged to the Calvinist faith. The Calvinist faith says to its followers, you are ordained by God to look over the lesser breeds. They were planning to steal the land from the African on the boats before they saw the land. Their intention toward the African was never good. Now can you see the ridiculousness of sharing the land in Namibia or South Africa with the European? Do you know any time in history the European has shared land or power with us? Now when you go back and read Malcolm X's message to the grassroots, when he deals with the land basis of nation, the one thing we have lost that keeps us from actually ruling nations the way nations need to be ruled, you give so many you come into power giving away so many guarantees that the guarantees literally makes you a colony again. Already in Namibia, whites have been guaranteed that their businesses will not be disturbed. The national resources will not be nationalized. Now what kind of nation is that when you got to still get a foreigner's permission on your land? And your land is still in the hands of foreigners. The first thing you do when you proclaim a nation is to take back the land. I admire Nelson Mandela, but I have some serious questions about some of his words. When he says he don't believe in white dominance or black dominance, it gives me some trouble because somebody got to be in charge. And inasmuch as whites don't obey blacks, and whites don't share with blacks, and whites don't enter into equal partnerships with blacks, what kind of nation can you have when nobody is in charge? The whites did not come there to share any land with Africans. They didn't come there to give any equality. They didn't come there to be just. They came there to control. The European is clear about it. You're the one who's not clear. Everywhere he goes into the world, he goes to control. Power is his game. Murder is his name. He'll violate not only all the 10 commandments, but give him 10 more and he'll violate them too. But he will control and stay in power by any means necessary. Then you're going to have to get the stomach and the mind and the will to say, I will dislodge you from my land and gain control by any means necessary. Anything I do to break your power over my land is morally right. I commit no sin. Now, if I've got a 6-room house, and if I catch a thief in my house, I don't bargain for whether he should use the front room or the back room. I bargain for with an undertaker to take his body out of my house. We have failed to deal with what is real in the world. Now let's deal with fantasy, admitting we're dealing with fantasy. Now suppose Africans had been alerted 30 years ago, and suppose that students studying in this country would not study political science and all the other these subjects are absolutely useless to Africa. Suppose they studied military tactics, suppose they studied mining engineers, but at harbor engineer, airport engineers, electronics, comparative electronics, different countries. This group studied electronics in Germany, another studied electronics in Japan, another studied electronics in the United States. They all come back and compare and create an electrical system to be better than all those they studied. Did it quietly, don't shout, no mass meetings. No slinging your fist in the air. We use our energy the wrong way. And suppose 30 years ago, when you had veterans in the United States from the Korean War, veterans from the war in Vietnam, veterans from the First World War, suppose we had made a Pan-African connection with the African world. We had the best trained soldiers in the world at our disposal. We could scatter them through Africa as tourists. And then, at the proper time, they could put on a uniform and march on South Africa and take the whole damn thing. Don't argue with nobody. Take back what belongs to you, but get ready to rule it and to rule it right. before you take it back. Prepare yourself. An admiral named Perry went and kicked over the door of Japan and kicked the Japanese in the face and insulted them. They spent the next 50 years sending that children to all kinds of schools, learning everybody's technique. You see them in America, taking pictures. Everybody said, they're silly little Japanese, always taking pictures. When they got home, they could build every house they took. Every time they took a picture of a train, they sent it back home and learned how to make a train. Took a picture of a car, sent it back home and learned how to make a car. Silly. 1905, they took on Russia and kicked Russians behind. Sino-Japanese War. A cry went up, beware the yellow peril, the yellow danger. The cry is going up again. How is it you defeat a people, throw 2 atomic bombs on a people, and now you're begging the same people for commercial space in the world? They did not hold one demonstration, didn't have one picket line, no announcement anywhere. Quietly went and did what they have to do. And that's what you're going to have to do. You are so ego-starved. You want people to know. I mean publicity. You want publicity. You want to stand up. You go to a black meeting, over half of the meeting, well, Jim Jones, who brought in the bench, stand up. Take a bow, Jim. With the janitor who swept the floor, stand up. Over half of the meeting, you're acknowledging people who did a little something and a little something. And that Susan who helped on the committee, who came out of her sick bed to do this, but she standing up. No. Everybody knows who did what. So nobody stands up and identifies themselves, because if everybody stood up, you will know where the talent is. You start killing it off. And the one thing they don't want you to know is who's got the talent. They don't want you to know that man over there can make a train. They don't want you to know that, because you might kill it. So they went about quietly doing what they have to do. They could take one car and break it down. They tell one man, you make this part, you make that part. Take a train, break it down. You make that part. You mean to tell me that the condition of their brain is no different from the condition of ours? Then what do they have? A will, a cultural habit of keeping quiet until the right time. They were humiliated in America. They were scorned. They went to American military schools and it had American whites spit in their food. And they brushed against them and said, society. They took that humiliation 2 generations. They dropped their thank you note at Pearl Harbor. And now they're dropping another thank you note, buying up Rockefeller Center. I heard a rumor they're buying up Sylvia's restaurant in Harlem. You can't even own a soul food restaurant in your own community. $3 million. 10 numbers backers can put that money together in less than 2 months. Why don't we do it? Now, let's go back to the development of South Africa. Because there are certain things on this checkerboard that you have not paid any attention to. When those Boers arrived, they met a little people called the Khoisan Sand people. They mistakenly called Hottentot and Bushmen. These were African people and kind people. They were kind and considerate. They saw these foreigners who had no land. They gave them some land. They weren't selling it. Said, we got plenty of it. I got enough for my use. You can go and use it. They weren't deeding it to them. I see you have no cattle. I'm going to give you a few. Start your herd. Europeans not that kind to them, not that kind to anybody. Some of them, you are men without women. That could be the perfect host. Gave them women. It's the origin of the so-called colours in South Africa. You will always find the greatest amount of laws against cohabitation, while the greatest amount of cohabitation has already occurred in South Africa and in the American South. So once these little people discovered that the guest in his home had came to conquer, they began to fight back. Fought back remarkably well. 11 major wars called the Kaffir Wars. In the Dutch language, the nigger wars. You can talk about all South Africa, you don't talk about these wars. These wars came before there were 2 sets of Zulu wars. You got to make the separation. Most people don't do this. The Zulu wars of consolidation and the Zulu wars of defense. These Kaffir wars were behind them before the Zulus began to fight wars of consolidation, wars to consolidate all the blacks in southern Africa in order to save them from domination by the whites. This is why you don't understand Chaka, because you don't read well enough to know that Chaka never fought one white man. Chaka fought other Africans to bring them into a coalition to save the entire country for African people. And when he lost that war, his half-brother and assassin, Dingaan, came to power. The British came in and pushed the Boers. The Boers pushed the Zulus, and the Zulus fought back. It's the end of the wars of consolidation and the beginning of the wars for defense. Dingaan had stopped the inward move of the Boers 3 times, the so-called inward track. They met him in the last battle on what was once called the Orange River. Sometimes the Africans call it the Fish River. But after this battle, so many butchered and bloody bodies flowed down that river. It was called the Blood River. Today in South Africa, they figure if Africans would start a revolt, it would be on the anniversary of that revolution. I think October 16th. Finally, Dingaan worn down and defeated. (1840). 1842, driven into exile, and he dies. Into power came a Zulu puppet, Mpande. Mpande was such a puppet He was a disgrace to the Zulus. He was a Slav. He married women. The Zulus had certain women the kings are only supposed to marry to, certain families. He married outside of the family. He discarded wives like he discarded his clothing. He drank beer to outrageousness. But from this weakling came a strong son, Cachuayo. Cachuayo wanted to avenge the wrong that was done to his father, especially by missionaries who misled him. So he began to prepare for a war against the British in general and the missionaries. So he began his attack after practically 9 years of preparation. 1879, a place called Rock's Draft, a missionary station. And if sometime at the late show, there's a picture called Zulu. Technically, it's a well-made film. Historically, it's a lie. They mixed all the regiments, the Black Shield, the Brown Shield, and the White Shield. Each regiment color meant a specific thing in Zulu life. The White Shield Regiment, these were assault troops, young people, trainees. They would hit the enemy once just to let him know the battle was started. The Brown Shield Regiment would come in and try to win the battle if they could. If they couldn't, the Zulu Elite Guard would come on the field, and they could never leave the field. They had to win or die. That was a prize regiment. Only that regiment could marry. Special beer brewed for them alone. Special exercise, special food. Now, Cachuayo would meet the British later. The idea of attacking that missionary station was to lure them to a mountainous area called Asan Helvina. This is one of the great battles for the control of southern Africa. One of the few perfect battles in history. When you go and study in military schools, they study this battle. The British had their back to the sea. There was a mountain on each side. And Cachuayo was standing in front with his army. Total encirclement. They could go into the sea. They couldn't go over the mountain because he had his men scattered all over the sides of the mountain, waiting for them to come up the mountains. He had revolutionized the Zulu war fighting machine, the spear, the Zulu throwing weapon, the assegai. He had a throwing spear, he had a short spear for close water fighting. Finally, he gave the signal, and almost that entire regiment was wiped out. After this, Cachuayo made the mistake that a whole lot of heads of state made, including Nkrumah. You should never leave your nation at a time of crisis. He went to England. The war was unpopular in England. Although British had suffered great loss, British wanted to make clothing for him because he was walking around England in his fine Zulu clothing, which meant practically not many clothing at all. So tailors made suits for him, and just to see how he would look in a top hat, you know. He put it on once, got a picture taken through it all. But when he got back to England, got back to South Africa, the British had split this country up into 13 different parts and put all one against the other. He was driven into exile. And the British breathed easily and said, at last the Zulu has been broken. They had spoken prematurely. The Zulu was not broken. There were other fights to fight. Later on, there was the battle in southern Africa when an old man came home from the Congo. Well, he had been fighting with a general named Tam Anna. And he began to accuse the Zulus of being cowards. He said, you've got no blood on your spears. Have I come home to a race of old women? Your women have been violated. Your culture has been insulted. Are your spears broken? Is this the Zulu people I left? This is old Chief Sigananda of the Kubes. He started his private war. There was a young man, Bambata, came to him to start to assist in the war. And he found it as an insult. So you telling me what your father did to help me? Your father was a Zulu, I was a Zulu. Zulus help Zulus. He spit on the ground, which is tantamount to cursing. We forget that there are no curse words in some languages, but there are curse gestures. Spitting on the ground is a curse gesture. And he went back to Zululand, but when he came back to Natal, the old man had started his war. That would last 9 months. Coming after the Boer War, the British had promised, the Zulus had promised them they would remit the taxes, but instead of remitting their taxes, the British had doubled their taxes, putting a tax on dogs. The British had come to the rescue of the very Boers whose guts they hated then and hate now. But they couldn't stand to see a white people defeated. Now you know how white people come together, even when they hate each other, when you are concerned? Same thing in the Civil War. They eventually got together, killed each other for 4 years, eventually got together. While you are concerned, all you got is up south and down south. Only up south is getting worse than down south. Now, Bambata was supposed to be defeated in 1906. His wife did not go into mourning, indicating that Bambata was not dead. The British paid no attention to it. But this is the last of the massive Zulu wars. This is really the preface to the founding of ANC. ANC would be founded in 1913, about the same time radius as the founding of the NACP. The ANC have today some of the same misguided concepts of the NACP. They think integration will get it. It will not. Only equals can be partners. And if you integrate with something stronger than you, you are dominated. You have participated in the colonization of yourself. But with the rise of ANC, Africans began to get some attention. There was a fine African named John L. Dubé. Went through South Africa, he educated at one of the then Boer College, Westwater, So taken by white acceptance, he wrote a scurrilous book called The Black Man is His Own Worst Enemy. When someone told him what a big fool he was, he spent the rest of his life building ANC. This man who laid the foundation for ANC in all the villages, John L. Dubé. He's a cousin of the same Dubé was having the problem at Stony Brook. Now we see it rising. In the 20s, we saw the rise of the South African Communist Party under Bunting. Bunting would go to Russia with a delegation of the South African Communist Party. It didn't take one black. Stalin would get so angry he wouldn't even shake his hand. He would come back the next year with the South African Communists, the famous Zulu champion, almost 7 feet tall. He was a champion every way possible. Champion would be thrown out of the party for nationalistic tendencies. The same thing as many blacks were thrown out of the party here. You are penalized among whites when you show excessive love for yourself and your own people. And you don't get this point. Champion still went to them and told them, if you mean what you said, nationalism or no nationalism. And why the whole concept of homeland was started by the South African communists. And when they approached Champion about homeland, separate homelands for the Africans, he said, yes, good, homeland, I'll take all of it. I mean, you go back to your homeland, I'll stay in mine. Got the point. He wasn't smiling because he wasn't joking. Very soon, the Communist Party of South Africa grew suspicious of the African in his ranks and began to propagate a concept of South Africa, workers unite for a white South Africa. And when Robert Rooke, who wrote one of the finest books ever written on the South African struggle, called Time Longer Than Rope, nominated John S. Marks as head of the South African Communist Party, the whites thought he was crazy and he had to run for his life. And he stood and said, I nominate the African, John S. Marks. You nominated an African to be head of a white-run South African Communist Party? The South African Communist Party has always been racist, and still is. They accept black tokens. So we wonder why you would come out and praise them and their corporation. We know that they're only agents for white capitalists in Southern Africa. But in the late 20s, a young man from Nyasaland came down into Southern Africa. His name was Clement Kadele. He built the largest trade union movement ever built in Southern Africa. Trade Technical Workers Union. I probably got the initials wrong. ITU. Industrial Commercial Workers Union. He and his enthusiasm asked Ramsay MacDonald, then a Labourite, to send him some people from the British Labour Party to help administer the union. Ramsay MacDonald, anxious to get rid of the communists who's giving him some trouble, just dumped them into South Africa, and they began to fight among themselves, and they helped to wreck Clement Kadele's union. Clement Kadele was so politically dead after that. Most people don't know that Clement Kadele actually didn't die until 1947. And that he wrote a wonderful account of this, but probably the best graphic account of the rise of it is in Robert Rooke's book, Time Longer Than Rope. You find some information on Kodali in a book, an early work by George Padmore called Black Negro Workers and Toilers. You find more work on him in George Padmore's last big book, Communism, Pan-Africanism or Communism. But when you look at this, was the greatest single trade unionist produced in all Africa. Now, I'm not forgetting Isaac Wallace of Sierra Leone, a great trade unionist who lived almost into our times. But the fear of the results of this trade union caused the South Africans to double the past laws, to make them even more stringent. Now, I know what I've left out, and it's essential, but time is no waiter for man or child. I have left out the role of Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa. It's a separate lecture. When Mahatma Gandhi was in South Africa, got thrown off the train, the movie gave you a false concept. Mahatma Gandhi objected to being on the train with Africans. He objected to being put in the coach with the Africans. He was what a lot of East Indians still are, brown-skinned white nationalists. You can't deal with this. You won't deal with, you assume that everybody who's not white, everybody, that they could be our friend. That's a possibility, but that's not true. Gandhi found several organizations, the Natives League, the Coloreds League, but he left the organization when he went to India with the Mr. Adoramam. Mr. Adoramam made a deal with the South African government that is still intact. The East Indians agreed that if they did not have to carry the pass, they would keep quiet while you impose the pass on the Africans. They are still quiet about it. Now, if Africans gain control of that country, there's a whole lot of people that do some payments. The so-called coloreds began to realize when they were taking off the voter roll that their lot wasn't appreciably different. African organization after the war led to the massacre at Sharpeville. The massacre at Sharpeville heightened the political awareness of Africans throughout the world of the tragedy in Southern Africa. Finally, a group grew impatient with ANC and pulled away, demanding more direct commitment to the land and for African total control. That was the PAC. They wanted the land to be restored to the people. They did not engage in power sharing. This is why when Mr. Mandela came out of prison and praised the communists and praised all the others, he did not praise them at all because he had not been attuned to dealing with them. Now, Mr. Mandela could be a strategist, buying time when he could speak with a stronger voice. I hope I am right, but I do not know whether I am or not. And when he said, I do not want black dominance or white dominance, I'm not too clear as to what kind of dominance he wants, in as much as somebody will have to dominate. In my conversation with Bishop Tutu, I said to him, I do not want a power sharing out South Africa. I do not discuss one man, one vote. I do not discuss partnership. I want a South Africa that is African ruled, as England is English ruled, as France is French ruled. If anybody cannot live on terms laid down by an African and by a law created by an African, let him get out. You have to do the same thing any place in Europe. You go to Europe, you eat the food of a European. They don't make no special food for you. They don't make no special law for you. And they share no power with you. That if there are those who love Africa so much they never want to leave, then we can make arrangement for that. We can give him a piece of Africa, the length of his body from head to toe, 6 feet under the ground. And we can grow tomatoes on top of it. We will not disturb you. The roots of tomatoes don't get that deep. You will still down there in your little encasement. We'll grow tomatoes or potatoes right over your head. Going on about our business. Feeding the nation, all people supposed to do. Now my conclusion, because there is no conclusion, is that there is no solution for us in the world except a nationalist and Pan-African solution. Until we love ourselves enough to give preference to ourselves, we won't make nations again. Until we believe in ourselves again, until we believe in our ability again, until we love our children again, until we stop begging our children to what to study, we line 10 up and say, okay, Jimmy, you study oceanography, you study mechanical engineering, you study this, and I don't want no answer. Don't tell me mathematics is hard. It was hard for those blacks who built the pyramids, so it must be a little lighter for you. No nonsense. That's exactly what the Japanese did. I'm not saying Japan is any model. I consider a bunch of yellow races. I mean, I ain't got no illusions about them loving us. I ain't got no illusion about anybody loving us. But if you don't love yourself, you're not loved. What you have to do is to turn inward on yourself, and you have to stop this silly argument among yourselves. We are people on the threshold of greatness, on the threshold of independence. And this was advocated years ago, and when the person advocating it told me the story, I found it hard to believe. He said, John, we will have no difficulty getting to the door of the promised land. But we will get to the door of the promised land, and we will bunch up at the threshold and argue about whether to cross over with our left foot or our right. And that's where we are, arguing at the door of the promised land. It doesn't matter a damn whether you use your left foot or your right foot in crossing over into the promised land, so long as you get over that. It's a terrible thing for people to be out of power, because when people are out of power for a long time, they long desperately for power. And when they get close to power, they panic. They have not been reconditioned for power. They have seen other people in the image of power. They've seen other people in the image of heroes. They believed in other people's culture, other people's God. They've lusted at other people's women. They've ate other people's food. You have to restore a people's belief in themselves. You have to restore a people's belief in their own history. You have to understand that the role of history is like a clock that tells people their special time of day, politically, culturally, and otherwise. It is a compass that tells people where they are on the map of human geography. History is supposed to tell the people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important, history is supposed to tell a people where they still must go and what they still must be. And remember, at the heart of all of this, the role of history to a people is the same as the role of a mother to her child. Thank you.
We don't have time for question and answer, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sure.
Okay. All right. We're going to have a moment, give him a moment's rest, and there's several announcements that few people we have to make. Like Brother John, come up and make his, and anyone else, let me know if you have any announcements to make.
Basic theoretical, the basic theory of the Christian concept came out of the Nicene Conference. And any good library, look under the word Nicene Conference. There are several conferences now, and you can't just read about any one of them. John Jackson's Man, God, and Civilization has some information on it. Dr. Ben's The African Origins of Major Western Religions, some information in it. But if you want general knowledge, you can go look up the word Nicene Conference in any good library, and you'll see the number of books written on that. But the Christian Bible was really codified and dogmatized as a political instrument for the Europeans, really to control our mind. And if you read Alvin Boyd Kuhn's work, Shadow of the Third Century, you will discover that St. Augustine, the African father of the church, said that when he read about what these Europeans are doing, it makes him laugh because they're giving us a religion we had 3,000 years ago. If you read John Jackson's book, Christianity Before Christ, it will tell you the kind of religious shape the world was in before Christ, and the fact that we had the same religion under other names 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. Thank you.
Last week, Kwame Ture spoke about one of the paths that we might take to empowerment, being that we might get off the fence, as many of us are sitting, and join some organizations to organize and take a part. You spoke of earlier our powers and our strengths as an African people. Can you go into that a little bit more? And as a sidebar, can you also perhaps mention whether or not our involvement in the political arena is strengthening that as well?
I believe we should always be involved in the political arena. I think we should choose our sides selectively. We should follow people who know where they're going. I think too many times we waste energy following people who don't know where they're going. I think all of us should belong to some kind of organization. I think our energies need to be better used. I think a lot of our organization is a sheer waste of time. And that includes some of our political organizations who are leading us no place except a round robin to put money in the collection plate. But I have no objection to any form of organization that's honest and leading our people. But a whole lot of organizations are not only leading our people in the wrong direction, but they're absorbing so much time and energy and resources of our people without contributing anything to them. I think we need to examine all organizations, all leaders, and weed out the phonies from the real people. But I'm not against organizations at all. And I think if anything is going to be taken from a lower to a higher level, it requires some discipline and some organizational structure. Hotel.
Can you please share with us your observation on just why is it that those of us who are Pan-Africanists, Black nationalists, Afrocentric, are the most difficult to cooperate with one another?
Because some of us are lying to ourselves about being just that. I consider myself a Pan-Africanist, a nationalist, and a socialist. I see no contradiction in being all three at one time. But I think a whole lot of people who say this is merely a phony, and I've encountered a whole lot of brothers in the movement who are, I call pimps without portfolio, female exploiters, and who really are soulless when it comes to giving consideration to the other half of our population. And I've had to repeatedly call attention to the fact that you cannot build a great national structure if one half of your population is dissatisfied and unfulfilled. And that half of the population must also share some of the blame for some of the difficulties among us. We have to build beautiful and meaningful human relationships one to the other. I actually think we lie to each other too much and we exploit each other too much. And there's too much disenchantment over this, and some of the brothers have not delivered, and some of the ladies are confused, and they confuse that case with white female lib movement that has nothing to do with them at all. And we need a movement, all right. We need a movement bigger than theirs, but we need it for our reasons and not for their reasons. Because I do not believe that the black woman is by nature a male hater. But the white woman, growing up in a different kind of environment, has developed some out and out male hatred. I think the brothers need to be straightened out and the ladies need to hook up with them, because I don't see no place for us to go without each other. And I don't think any of us are going to go any place alone.
I was reading a little on the occupation of Florida by the runaway slaves, and the wars that took place that lasted about 150 years. But from what I understand, there's little information on it. Can you elaborate on that?
Florida is the one place where a large number of blacks ran away and integrated themselves into indigenous American groups, so-called Indians. to the point where the American military fighting the Seminole Wars sent messages back to Washington and said, these are no Indian wars, these are nigger wars. Because some of the officers were black, and the last Seminole War was really fought over a black woman. Most people don't seem to know that. Osceola, the Indian king, had a black wife who was a runaway slave. When they tried to get her, take her back, that started the war. But most of the soldiers in Osceola's army were black male runaway slaves. I read a PhD thesis on the racial basis of the last Seminole War. The girl started the PhD thesis at NYU and got thrown out, and she came to me at Cornell and asked me, would she get thrown out if she write the thesis for me? I said, right, go ahead, sugar. Do your best. Just write it well. And she did. And she got her PhD and she's doctor somebody now.
Peace, Dr. Clarke.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. This question was developed from reading a book by J. Rogers, From Superman to Man. And it's something that stands out in my mind. He was talking about cannibalism amongst white people. And he mentions Scythians. And I'd like you to, tell me, who are the Scythians? And maybe refer some literature, maybe I can find out a little.
Scythian, you talking about people of Italy, at the toe of Italy?
If I'm correct, Scythian.
Scythian.
Scythians.
Scythian.
Scythians. Scythians, right?
I'm not familiar with the people as such, but I am familiar with some forms of cannibalism that developed among whites, and some right here in this country, in the Northwest frontier. I think the charge of cannibalism leveled against people is often false. And very often the people accused of cannibalism are people who have plenty of meat. And sometimes cannibalism is leveled against people who are vegetarians who don't eat meat anyway. And it's generally leveled by whites against certain black non-whites they want to conquer. We need to examine the whole concept of cannibalism, and it's one of the false cases of history, in as much as there's probably not 10 proven cases in all history. Mr. Rogers' research is pretty good, and I'll research behind his work and find it substantial. I have not had reason to research this particular item because it's not a burning issue with me, knowing all of the mythology and lies around cannibalism. And I could have not given that item as much attention as I should have, but I'll check I have all of his works at home, and I'll check it and look it up and see if I can find out who he's more precisely who he's talking about. But I really don't have a specific answer with that reference right now.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What he was talking about was Scythians. It's my people it's in the local community. I believe you just mispronounced the word, that's all. Okay.
Tiffany, Dr. Clarke.
Yeah.
The question I was wondering, why people always call the Europeans white people when the color white represents purity or spiritual purity, and I'm really definitely sure that they're not pure by any chance, and they're not white. I've looked at the color white a lot of times, and I've never seen them look like that before.
Well, people pick arbitrary names for people that approximate their color. When you look at yellow people, he was referred to as yellow, they're not really physically yellow. And white people are not physically white. If you take a white piece of paper and put it up against his skin, there's no resemblance between his skin and that white piece of paper. But that's an approximation or symbolic of what he is, and people just get stuck with the word. There's a lot of people in Africa who are not mixed with Arabs, not mixed with Europeans, and who are not white, who are not black. And yet they're classified as black. There are a lot of people in India who are jet black and they're classified as Caucasians.
Well, in the African, and they call the black people, they call us black, and that the black means unknown, and that keeps us back sometimes. When we say the African or African American, that kind of gives us a stronger base to stand on.
Well, I don't believe in color designations for an ethnic group, because black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. Like Richard Moore did often say in his lifetime, the name of a people must always relate to land, history, and culture. And anytime you address a people and call them by a name that fails to relate to land, history, and culture, you have called them out of their name. So I opt for the word Africa, not fro, because there's no fro in Africa. Yes.
What if, Professor Clarke, given the fact that we have been subject to all kinds of police brutality in New York, New Jersey area by Caucasians, as well as our own people who are also part of the members of this trust, what effective way do you think we should protect ourselves as far as this goes? Or shall we continue to sing along the street and let them do whatever they want?
I think we need to develop a strategy of protection for ourselves in relationship to law enforcement. And when I say develop a strategy, remember now that you can discuss intent in public. But when you discuss strategy, you discuss strategy with 3 people and distrust 2 of them. I said develop a strategy, don't announce a strategy. We announced too much already.
Dr. Clarke, I'm now afraid to ask you this question, but what would you suggest as a curriculum for a school for our children?
An honest one. An honest curriculum telling the real truth about what happened in history would not only be good for our children, be good for any children. You don't have to call it black, or you don't have to call it anything. If just be honest about it, just tell the real truth. And our children need special things told to them, and we need to tell them about African folklore, African stories, and we need to tell them about the legend of Timbuktu, the legend of the golden stool, the great beautiful legends of our history. We need to tell them about Chaka's early years, Chaka's relationship to his mother, Ninda, and we need to tell them beautiful things about and how we survived in this country. We should have a child way of explaining the Palmares and Bahia and how African slaves established a state in Brazil that lasted 110 years. There are many positive things we can be saying to our children. Too many times we are too negative with our children. And too many times women who've given personal favors and had a child by a man gets angry with the child, says, "You're just like your no good father." If he was good enough for you to give a personal favor and have a child by him, there must have been something good somewhere along the line. I mean, downgrading the child's father, and it serves no purpose. If you got anything against the child's father, take it up directly with the child's father. But remember, to all children, both the mother and the father are heroes in his life. Both the mother and the father are ideals in his life. His and all her life. And these other matters should be taken up on another way, in a kind of another arena. I don't mean you shouldn't address yourself to people who wronged you. You have every right to do that. You got a responsibility to do that. You shouldn't let all anger pin up inside of you and drive you crazy. You have no money to go pay in the psychiatrist no $50 an hour. You got to tell it to somebody, but you can't get it out on the child.
Dr. Clarke, I recently encountered this quote-unquote Christian, and as we began to have a conversation, he kind of downplayed the fact that the ancient Egyptians worshipped dead people, and that the Ankh symbolizes something that is dead. How do you deal with, quote-unquote Christians who come out of a biblical perspective? What do you counteract to offshoot what they say to you?
Well, most people who worship dead people. Most all the world. Is Christ walking around? So look, ancestral worship is respect for people who've gone on before. It sounds reasonable. These are the spirits of people who've gone on before. Because they've gone on before, whoever God is, whoever the deity is, they're closer to him than you are. So you communicate with them so they in turn can communicate with the deity in your favor. There's nothing unreasonable about ancestor worship. I'm not advocating any religion, but I'm saying that there's a lot. in so-called primitive religions, if you understand them, that's kind of reasonable. Having lived in one of these societies and having been initiated into one of their religions, I know this to be true. I'm not going to tell you who it is. I jealously guard it. I'm no missionary. I'm not trying to sell you anything, because I keep it to myself. But that's probably my decision to be more spiritual than religious. When I began to study and to live among indigenous Americans called Indians in Mexico and different Africans, and have them explain their spirituality to me. And I realized that I really wasn't a religious person, but I was a highly spiritual person. Besides, otherwise I'd be rich. Because I never met a rich man that had any better mind than me. I have the mind to bring off riches if that's what I wanted. But I couldn't live with myself if I pulled some of the same deals they pull.
Thank you.
I came across a book, and I wanted to know if you had ever came across the book. It's a book called Muhammad Gospel, and the person who wrote the publication claimed to be popular on the run. And he brought out very interesting points.
Read the first name again. Something Gospel.
Muhammad.
Muhammad.
F-A-H-A-M-M-E. Muhammad Gospel.
I'm familiar with the book. It's just another of many books, offbeat religious books advocating a variation of the theory of salvation. And I didn't find anything radically new in it. It's interesting. Now, I don't know much to say about it other than the fact that I've seen 100 books like this, and I respect the creativity of the mind of the writer while not especially accepting the substance of what he's saying.
Peace. Anyone else with any questions? Okay. All right. That's all we have. Dr. Clarke. Thank you.